This video is a continuation of Comenius Plants Part 1b, Trees. Sorba, Silicae graecae vel syriacae, et Cudonia, Aurantia, Chytraa, Limonia, et Punica vel granata mala stipant, adstringunt, alvum sistunt. Ta ua, ta ceratia, ta mela cudonia, ta chytria, hi roae, staltica, stuptica, stuponta, coelian histasi. Comenius's time was still pretty much under the sway of ancient medicine, and if you watched our Praefationes on Dioscorides, you know that ancient medicine ascribed the general properties of binding and loosening, staunching and dispersive, softening and hardening to many plants. These general properties had various specific effects on the body, and I believe Comenius here is talking in particular about stool hardeners and softeners. In fact, I have added to the text the phrase common in Pliny and in Dioscorides for calming the bowels, alvum sistunt, coelian histasi. Looking once again at the contemporary botanist Gaspar Bohin's Pinax Theatri Botanici, published 8 years before the first edition of the Janua, we get a suggestion of where the citrus flavor in Comenius' sentence may have come from. Within Bohan's broad category of Pomiferae arbores, he has the sequence Malus cudonia, Chytria, Limonia, Aurantia, Punica. 3 of these fruits are in the citrus genus of our citrus family Rutaceae, the orange, the citron, and the lemon. According to Bohan, the orange was unknown to the ancients. Aurantia forte a corticis colore, qui colore auri relucet, ut aurea mala vere nominari possunt, veteribus ignota, incitione ad nos devenerunt. The golden apple, perhaps named from the color of its skin, which shines with the color of gold, so that they can justifiably be called golden, unknown to the ancients, they have worked their way to us by the process of grafting, all the way from Southeast Asia, according to our contemporary botanists. Theophrastus called the citron to melon medicon e persicon, kai eoiken holos ho topos ho pros anatolas kai mesembrian hos per kai sdoia kai puta peren idia paratus alus, hoion heta media cora kai persis ala te eke plea kai to melon to medicon e to persicon calumenon. And it seems generally the region facing the sun risings and midday, in other words the east and the south, grows plants just as they do animals, quite particular compared to other regions. For example, the Median and Persian country has both many other examples, and in particular the so-called Median or Persian apple. Pliny also uses this designation, Malus Assyria quam alii medicam vocant, but Pliny also uses the native Italian name Chytria, which in turn the later Greeks borrowed from the Romans. Malorum plura sunt genera, de Chytriis cum sua arbore dixamus, medica autem Graeci vocant patriae nomine. There are many types of apple. Of citrons and their tree we have already spoken, and the Greeks called these meads after the name of their country of origin. Bohin doesn't tell us anything about the history of the lemon, other than serving as a witness that the Western world had the lemon tree, the lemon fruit, and the word lemon by his time. In fact, from around 1400, according to the online etymology dictionary, which again tells a fascinating history of fruit and fruit name migration. In this case, the name may ultimately be Balinese or Malaysian. The genus Citrus contains fruit of the fruit type Hesperidium, fruit with a leathery pericarp we call the rind or peel, and segments we call locules divided by walls we call septa. If you guessed that the name of the fruit type Hesperidium has something to do with the golden apples of the Hesperides, you're right. It was Linnaeus who made that association. Here is his entry in the Species Plantarum for his genus Citrus. He has two species, the Citrus medica or citron and the Citrus aurantium or orange. He records the Citrus limon as a variant of the citron as indicated by the beta in his text. Of it, he says, varietates huius hodie numerosissimae una cum sequenti mixtae, de quibus Hesperides consulendae. Today, there are many, many varieties of the lemon mixed with the orange that follows. If you want to know about these, you must consult the Hesperides. Let's close by doing that. Ficus, fraga, mora nigra, mora rubi idae, myrta et myrtili vel vacinia nigra laxant lubricantque. Tolsucon, hocarpos tes comaru, tomoron, hocarpos tes batu tut esti to batinon, kai tes batu idaias, to myrton, kai he ampelos tes ides, calastica, lutica. If you're using this information to prepare your own herbal laxatives, be aware that the Italian strawberry, fraga, was not the same plant as the Greek strawberry tree, hekomaros. Fraga was unknown to the Greeks. This is explained by Pliny. Alla ud corpus est terrestribus fragis, alla ud congeneri eorum una doni, quod solum pomum simul e frutice terraque gignitur. The flesh of the ground strawberry, the fraga, is different from that of the strawberry tree, the unado, which is related to it, the strawberry being the only fruit that grows at the same time on a shrub and on the ground. Pomum, meaning the unado, in honorum, ut qui nomen ex argumento sit unum tantum edendi. The fruit of the unado is held in no esteem, the reason for its name being that a person will eat only one. In other words, unado comes from unum edo. I'll leave it to you to decide whether Pliny is joking and whether this is actually the origin of the name. Duobus tamen his nominibus appellant Graeci komaron et memikulon. In any case, the Greeks call it by two names, komaros and memikulon. Komaros is the tree, memikulon the fruit. Et apud nos alio nomine arbutus vocatur. And with us, it, that is, the Greek strawberry tree, which in Pliny's time also grew abundantly in Italy, goes by another name, arbutus. Fraga, komaros, memikulon, unado, arbutus. Is that all clear? There are so many fruits with the name morus that it's easy to get them mixed up. In particular, don't mix up the black mulberry with the blackberry. Pliny doesn't help the situation because he uses the name morus for both. For example, reliqua carnosi sunt generis, e atque bacchis atque carnibus distant. The remaining fruits we have to discuss belong to the fleshy class, and they differ in the shape of their berries and texture of their flesh. Alla a acinis caro, alla a moris, alla a unadonibus. Berries like grapes have one kind of flesh, the mulberry another, the strawberry tree another. Moris succus in carne vinosus, trini colores candidus primo, mox rubens, matures niger. The flesh of the mulberry contains a vinous juice, and the fruit has 3 successive colors, first white, then red, and when ripe, black. Here, morus is the mulberry, the morus niger in the family Moraceae, and therefore a genuine morus, you might say. Nascuntur et in rubis multum differente calo. Mori also grow on brambles, but with a much harder skin. And this is the blackberry, a species in the bramble genus Rubus of the family Rosaceae. Here's the difference. Look very carefully at the mulberries on the left and the blackberries on the right. Each berry is a cluster, and if you look carefully at the photos, or better yet, buy some from the grocery store and eat them afterwards, you can see the component berries in the cluster look different. We saw this diagram before. The Rosaceae family blackberry, ABC in the diagram, begins as an inflorescence. Each flower in the inflorescence has multiple ovaries. These ovaries become fleshy during maturation, and their aggregate comprises a single blackberry. The Moraceae family mulberry, DEF in the diagram, also begins as an inflorescence. Each flower in this inflorescence has a single ovary. During maturation, this ovary remains hard, fruit-type achene, and it is the accessory sepal tissue that becomes fleshy. A single mulberry derives from the combined achene and fleshy sepal of each flower in the inflorescence, an example of a multiple fruit type. The mulberry and the blackberry are distant relatives. Moraceae and Rosaceae both belong to the order Rosales. But do you know which fruit is a much closer relative of the mulberry? The ficus is another genus in the Moraceae family, and the fig is essentially an inside-out mulberry, an entire edible flower cluster hidden inside its own stalk, as delightfully explained by Jean Osnas and Catherine Preston in their Botanist in the Kitchen blog. So Comenius's Mora nigra are black mulberries, his Mora ruby blackberries or bramble fruit. To complete the morum story, his morum of the Idaean bramble, the Rubus idaeus, is another Rosaceae genus and species, Linnaeus's Rubus idaeus, the raspberry. So what is this thing with Mount Ida? First we have the Rubus idaeus, the Idaean bramble or raspberry. Then we have Comenius's Myrtillus, translated as Heamphilos tes ides, the Idaean vine, Vitis idaea in Latin. Regarding the Idaean bramble, we have 2 witnesses. Theophrastus describes several species of batos or bramble, but doesn't qualify any of them as Idaean. Dioscorides does identify a batos idaea, named thus, he says, because a great deal of it grows on Ida. Eklete men diatopolein ente ide genastae. Named thus, according to Pliny, because no other type of bramble grows on Mount Ida. Idaeus rubus appellatus est, quoniam in Ida non alius nascitur. But in either case, there were 2 famous Mount Idas, one in Crete and one near Troy, and it's not clear which of these 2 either Dioscorides or Pliny means. The provenance of the Amphilos tes ides is unambiguous. The designation Amphilos tes ides is from Theophrastus, and it is one of over 20 references he makes to Mount Ida in the Troad. Idia de caetada ta periten iden estin, hoion hete Alexandria calumene dapne, kai Sucetis, kai Amphilos. Peculiar to their particular location are also these trees around Mount Ida, the tree called Alexandrian laurel, a sort of fig, and a vine. The Alexandria here refers not to Alexandria in Egypt, but to a city near Mount Ida in the Troad. Similarly, Pliny calls the Ompolos tes ides the Vitis Alexandrina. So that's the two coincidental uses of Mount Ida in the plant names of this sentence. But is Ompolos tes ides a proper translation for Comenius's Myrtillus? And for that matter, is Vaccinium a valid synonym for Myrtillus? And is Myrtillus related to Myrtus and a form of myrtle, as the name would suggest? Vaccinium has an uncertain or changing identity in antiquity. In Virgil's second eclogue, the lovelorn shepherd Corydon says, O formosa puer nimium ne creda colori, alba legustra cadunt, vaccinia nigra leguntur. Ah, lovely boy, trust not too much to your fair-skinned complexion. The white privets are left to fall, that is, they are not selected for garlands. It is the dark hyacinths that are culled. Virgil's editors take his Vaccinia nigra to be hyacinths. Pliny includes the Vaccinium among plants that only grow in watery environments. Non nisi in aquosis proveniunt salices, alni, populi, siller, ligustra, tesseris utilissima, item Vaccinia Italiae in aucupiis sata, Galae vero etiam purpurae tinguendae causa ad servitiorum vestes. Willows, alders, poplars, the siller and the privet, the last extremely useful for constructing tallies, will only grow in places where there is water, and the same is the case with the whortleberry, sown in bird snares in Italy, but in Gaul also to supply purple dye for the manufacture of slaves' clothes. Pliny's editors take his Vaccinium to be the whortleberry or European blueberry, though they hedge their bets and point out that the whortleberry does not in fact only grow in watery environments. Pliny describes the plant as grown in Italy and Gaul, and to my knowledge, neither Theophrastus nor Dioscorides describe a plant identified by their editors as being this Vaccinium or whortleberry, which means tentatively that we shouldn't try to translate Comenius's Myrtillus or Vaccinium into the Greek. But let's once again consult some of the prominent botanical writers of Comenius's time, and aha! We seem to get our answer from Matthias de Lobel, generally known by his Latinized name Matthias Lobelius. In his 1576 work, Plantarum seu stirpium historia, he says, Vaccinia nigra et rubra are identified as Theophrastus's Idaea vitis by Deschamps, Charles de L'Ecluse, a.k.a. Clusius, and others among the more expert herbalists. And it is the same plant that is called Myrtillus in the druggists' workshops or Officinae in Germany. So, there we have it, Myrtillus Vaccinium Vitis Idaea. He adds that this is the plant the Italian botanist Luigi Anguillara calls the bearberry, Uva ursi, and his fellow Italians Uva ursa. The Uva ursi is now a recognized species in the same family as the Myrtillus. The French call it by their local name, Airel. Bohan's Pinox also treats the Vitis Idaea and the Myrtillus as one and the same, as he titles his discussion Vitis Idaea sive Myrtillus et Idaea radix. The Idaean root is a plant from Dioscorides' fourth book on medicinal roots, the Idaea rhizda, now identified as the Ruscus hypoglossum. Why did the German druggists call these myrtilli? Bohan explains. Myrtilli autem dicuntur a forma baccarum, quae myrti bacchis similes sunt. Moreover, these are called myrtilli because the shape of their berries resembles that of the myrtle. In other words, the plant in question is the Vaccinium, Pliny's whortleberry or European blueberry, entirely distinct from the myrtus. It's just that, because of a resemblance in the appearance of its small berries to those of the myrtle, The German druggists dubbed these berries little myrtles, myrtilli, and the name stuck, and that was what was familiar to Comenius. However, Rombert Dodoen registered a strong objection to the identification of the Vaccinium nigrum with the Vitis idaea. Its berries are called in the vernacular Heidelbeeren by the Germans, Irel, as we've seen, by the French, in many of the German pharmacology workshops, as we've seen, myrtilli. He also gives the names used in Brabant and in Bohemia. But apud Graecos et veteres Latinos nomen quod sciamus non habet, nam quod plerique vitam idaeam a Plinio Alexandrinam cognominatam existiment veritati repugnat. There is not a name we are aware of for this plant among the Greeks and ancient Romans, for the fact that many think this plant is the Vitis idaea, called the Vitis alexandrina by Pliny, is repugnant to the truth. And Dodoens proceeds to make a persuasive case, including the rather fundamental argument that Theophrastus and the Greeks wouldn't have called the Ampelos tes ides an ampelos if it weren't a vine, or morphologically very similar to the vine, which the European blackberry is definitely not. Later, Sir Arthur Hort, in his Loeb edition of Theophrastus, identified this Idaean vine of Theophrastus as the Vitis vinifera variant Corinthiaca, which is a type of currant. This is a perfect example of the problems with plant identification and nomenclature that Linnaeus took it upon himself to solve once and for all. Digesting all of the above information, he gave our plant the binomial name Vaccinium myrtillus. And although we must side with Dodoens and judge it a misidentification for a plant unknown to the ancient Greeks, rather than leave Comenius's myrtillus untranslated, we've retained the Greek translator's ampelos tes ides, since that notion was current in Comenius's time. And here's a confession. In this case, I am the Greek translator. Lotos degustata oblivionem inducit. Lotos gegaumene lethen empoie. Comenius has in mind here, of course, the lotus eaters whom Odysseus and his companions encountered on their sea voyage home, as recounted by Odysseus to King Alcinous. Enthen den nemar peromen olois anamoisi ponton ep ichthu enta, atar decate epibemen gai es lotopagon, hoit anthenon edar edusin. From there, for 9 days, we were chased by those accursed winds across the fish-teeming sea. But on the 10th we beached on the land of the lotus eaters, who eat the flowery lotus fruit. And Odysseus sends out some of his companions as scouts. Hoid aips oikomenoi migen andrasi lotopagoisin. Ud ara lotopagoi medonth hetaroisin oletron hemeterois alaspidosan lotoio passastai. The companions left straightway and were soon mixing with the lotus eaters. Nor were the lotus eaters planning harm to our companions, but gave them lotus to eat. Tond hostis lotoio pagoi melieda a carpon, uket ep angelai palin etelen ude ne estai. Al autu bulonte mit andrasi lotopagoisi, loton ereptomenoi menemen nostute latestai. But as each ate the honeyed fruit of the lotus, he no longer wished to report back to camp nor return to his home, but they preferred to stay right there with the lotus eaters, grazing on the lotus and forgetting all thoughts of return. Now, in case some of you are wondering which plant was this lotus, because I'd like to have some of it, unfortunately, we just don't know. The jujube is a favorite candidate. We broke up sentence 123 of the Yanoa into manageable chunks So let's reprise the sentence in its entirety. Sorba, siliquae Graecae vel Syriacae, et Cudonia, Aurantia, Citraa, Limonia, et Punica vel Granata mala stipant, adstringunt, alvum sistunt. Ficus, fraga, mora nigra, mora rubi idae, myrta et myrtili vel vacinia nigra laxant, lubricantque. Lotos degustata oblivionem inducet. Ta ua, ta ceratia, ta mela Cudonia, ta Cytria, hae roae staltica, stuptica, stuponta, coelian histasi. To sucon, ho carpos tes comaru, to moron, ho carpos tes batu tut esti to batinon, cae tes batu idaias, to myrton, cae he ampelos tes ides, calastica, lutica. Lotos gegaumene, leten empoie. Please proceed to the next video in the playlist, the conclusion to Comenius Plants, Trees, Part 1b.